Joining me now is Gordon Chang, Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute and author of China is Going to War. Gordon, the headline sounds very promising, but that's not exactly the case when you read deep into the piece. Explain.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. For one thing, if Biden were worried about the bulk transfer of data to China, he wouldn't be urging his followers to transfer their data to China by joining TikTok. Now, this is rulemaking. That means we're not going to see an executive order for months. If Biden were serious, what he'd be doing is he would be taking China's law on data transfers to foreign parties, and he would be adopting the same in his executive order, just changing the date and putting U.S. at the top of the document rather than China. There's so much that Biden can do immediately, but he's not.
Gordon, our first question for you. What is your main thesis about why America has an issue with the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party?
It's not so much that we have an issue with them, they have an issue with us. The Communist Party believes that we're an existential threat. And they believe that not because of anything that we say or do, but because of who we are. They believe that because of our values and form of governance, they're worried about that inspirational impact on the Chinese people. So they believe that they will never be secure as long as the United States of America exists. So they declared a people's war on the U.S., the quote-unquote people's war.
When did they declare that?
May 2019. This was a landmark editorial in People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China. When People's Daily speak, it's China speaking. And in that editorial, they declared that people's war. And although we Americans may think that's just propaganda, for China, that phrase is critically important.
Excellent. What is the main, there's many different parts of unrestricted warfare, they've called it. There's information warfare and cyber warfare, there's economic warfare, and then kinetic warfare. What is the part of that you say is the biggest threat or the biggest problem that America faces right now?
That's a great question, and it's really hard to separate out.
Sure.
Clearly, all of those, especially when they're combined, are an existential threat to us. So you take recent one, fentanyl. Fentanyl in 2022, last year for which we have statistics, the CDC said that 70,000 Americans died from doses of illegal Chinese fentanyl. That's an incredible number. Those are people who are killed because fentanyl comes into our country not through what we think of as criminal gangs, but those gangs in China can't operate in their near total surveillance state without the approval of the Communist Party. And we don't really have to speculate because Chinese diplomats give cover to the gangs. The gangs launder their proceeds through the Chinese state banking system. Every container that leaves China is inspected by officials, and a lot of those fentanyl producers are actually state-owned. So when we talk about 70,000 Americans dying from fentanyl, that's killed, that is murdered by fentanyl.
And the underlying implication of that is that this could not happen unless it was sanctioned and allowed by the Chinese Communist Party.
More than just an implication. That's what I'm stating, that is what's occurring. They deliberately want Americans to die. On November 16th of last year, John Kirby, the NSC spokesperson, said that Xi Jinping told President Biden on the day before when they met in San Francisco that Xi Jinping said he did not want to see any one more American die from fentanyl. Well, that's a lie. And for John Kirby to repeat what's obviously a lie to the American people, to sort of prettify the Chinese regime, that's wrong. We know that this is murder, and we should be saying that out loud. We shouldn't be saying, oh, Xi Jinping is, yes. He thinks this is horrible.
Yes. Talking about fentanyl, how is the fentanyl coming in? Can you explain to people who might not know? Is it through the ports, by sea? Is it by air, or somewhere else?
It used to be sent in directly through the U.S. mail, which meant it went through the Chinese mail system.
Wow.
And then it was U.S. mail. When the U.S. government started to shut that down, then Chinese producers sent the precursor chemicals for fentanyl. It was then mixed by the Mexican cartels and then smuggled across the southern border.
You mentioned that America, let me put it this way. How is in your opinion, in the American consciousness, its understanding of the threat of China, both in the government and in the American populace?
Well, we have to understand that there's only going to be one survivor. It's going to be the People's Republic of China or the United States of America. Now, we don't like to think like that, but that's the way Beijing and the Communist Party thinks about it. That means that we have to recognize that. You know, for the 1990s, we heard Osama bin Laden talking about killing Americans. You know, even in 1993, he actually killed 6 Americans by the bombing of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. We just did not pay attention until one day when he reached out and killed 2,977 Americans. So we're Americans. We believe that we're entitled to ignore what our enemies say about us. You know, China is so much more powerful than Al-Qaeda ever was or ever could be. So we need to start paying attention, because although we're a much stronger country than China, we can lose America.
What you were just describing reminds me, it took an event in the American history, a very tragic event of September 11th, for America to wake up and change its ways and do something different. Perhaps it sounds like that might be the case for America, for ourselves right now, given our current state of the understanding of the Chinese threat, and we hope to not be there. China has talked about unrestricted warfare and the Sun Tzu type of understanding of war, and to subdue your enemy without having to fire a shot or draw blood. What would you say to America in terms of how the Chinese Communist Party is implementing this strategy and things that they should look out for, and what would be your guidance on this?
Well, in unrestricted warfare, it's fentanyl, it's COVID, it's intellectual property theft. It's so many ways that the Chinese regime attacks the United States. And the way that we should think about intimidation, win without fighting, you know, China believes that it can show this grand image of China and that everybody else in the world must bow down. And indeed, Xi Jinping has been pushing this idea of Tianxia, all under heaven, that Chinese emperors have not only the right, but the obligation to rule all under heaven. This is not hegemony, this is not domination, this is worldwide Chinese rule, which means that the United States is not sovereign, England's not sovereign, all the rest of it. And so they believe that they're so grand that the rest of us will submit. You know, in the meantime, he's building up his military. He hopes, you know, and making threats to use nuclear weapons, that we will back down, that we won't fight, that we will be so scared of his threats. So we have to understand that this is what Vladimir Putin's been doing trying to do in Ukraine, to prevent us from supporting Ukraine by making threats to use his nuclear weapons. So Xi Jinping has been doing the same thing. His regime has been threatening others over Taiwan and other things. And that is the win without fighting, intimidate your enemy.
You just mentioned the authority under heaven. For Americans who aren't really too familiar with the Chinese culture and what their religion is like, could you speak a little bit to them and how they can relate that into our own understanding of how government and religion is understood in America, and how we understand that as Americans, and also kind of the things that we hear about happening in like the underground Christians and the underground Catholic Church and the above ground Catholic Church?
Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, atheist. Now, the Communist Party has always been atheist, but Xi Jinping has been relentless in his persecution of people of faith. Used to be that they were just concerned about foreign religions, yes. So Catholicism, Protestants. Now they're actually going over religions that they consider to be homegrown. Buddhism. Buddhism, yes, it came from India, but the Chinese people actually thought, oh, this is local.
Yes.
But they're going after Buddhists as well. So it's a full front attack on faith. Unfortunately, Pope Francis came to a deal with China, which in 2018, which was extended. This, I think, has made undermined Catholicism in China. But one thing is that the fastest growing religion in the world probably is the Protestant sects in China. And because it's entirely underground, they can't control it. You know, in China they have what they call patriotic churches. So,
yes,
for instance,
right.
The patriotic Catholic Church, patriotic Protestant Church. But Chinese people just try to stay away from those for a lot of reasons. But, the house churches that meet for hours and hours and hours on Sundays, the Communist Party can't control that. And so we don't know how many underground Protestants there are, but there could be somewhere 60, 70, maybe 80 million of them. And the Communist Party is afraid of them because they realize that they have that zeal that the Communist Party had 100 years ago, but doesn't have now.
Right. You just made me think about everybody's talking about Christian nationalism, about being a threat in America. And we're looking about how there's the patriotic church in China. And it seems like it's communist nationalism or atheistic nationalism in China. And that's what they live under there, as opposed to having Christian nationalism here. Yeah. Who is worse on humanity? Xi Jinping or Putin?
The answer to that is Xi Jinping. And the reason is that Putin could not afford to wage his war on Ukraine were it not for China. China green-lighted that invasion. Remember that 5,300-word joint statement that was issued just 20 days before Russia attacked? That talked about their no-limits partnership. And since that time, China has been providing across-the-board support for the Putin war effort. So it's been elevated commodity purchases, which finances the war. China's opened up its financial system to Russian institutions that have been sanctioned. We see Chinese propaganda support, not only from Communist Party, but also from central government media outlets. Chinese diplomats support the Russian war effort, and China's been providing lethal aid. And so this support has been extensive, and it's kept Putin in the war.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the government, if they're really concerned about stopping the war in Ukraine, is that they need to talk with China about stopping the war in Ukraine.
We've talked to China about stopping the war in Ukraine. What we need to do is sanction China to stop the war in Ukraine.
What is the sanction that you think would be the most effective one to confront China?
The most effective thing, I think, is probably sanctioning their Chinese banks. We should be doing that because of fentanyl anyway.
Right.
To declare them to be of primary money laundering concern under the Patriot Act. That way we would disconnect them from their dollar accounts. The big international banks of China would be then threatened because they wouldn't be able to do dollar transactions.
Yes, right.
So these are things that we can do, but also trade sanctions, cutting off technical cooperation, all these things to make it clear to China that we're serious about them stopping the sale of fentanyl and stopping the support for Russia in Ukraine and Iran in Gaza and Israel.
It's all interconnected. Gordon, you have written extensively on this issue. You've written books. What would, to our audience and to Americans out there, what would you say is the best resource they could go to find out and learn and educate themselves on the threat of the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, that threat evolves all the time. So I think it's probably just reading everything. The Chinese regime has become opaque. So there really are no longer China experts. You're a China expert if you've read websites in the morning. Now, yeah, that's an exaggeration, but the point is that the situation is so it's evolving so fast. So I would do that.
And what is your book? What's your latest book that they can find out about your writings and your insight and how you think and approach the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah. I tweet about China all the time at Gordon G. Chang, GordonGchang. I archive my articles for free on my website, which is www.gordonchang.com.
Gordon, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with us, and we encourage all our viewers. Visit Gordon Chang on Twitter, read his work. He's a brilliant mind on the issue of China.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gordon.